everybody, welcome to yet another video. So this one is quite a long video, this one, and it's a little bit different to what you normally see me do, but it's not that unusual to what I normally do, if that makes sense. A lot of the stuff I do is a bit odd, really. You know, things that I don't often put on YouTube because I feel that they probably won't connect with people quite the way that automotive stuff does, because a lot of people like to do automotive stuff. Although I didn't realise how many people that watch this channel and general spray channels actually do guitars, and I have mentioned that a few times, and I will get a guitar and we'll just strip it down and do it up and paint it maybe a few different times to experiment with different things and different guns. But this one was something that I made up. It's actually a shoe rack. Now that's going to sound really odd, but it's quite appealing to somebody with a mechanical nature such as myself. I have an electromechanical background, an engineering background, so it's something I thought, well, I'll do as a you know, as a little project really. But when you see it at the end, it actually looks really, really good. So what we've got is we've got a couple of aluminium side plates, which have been primed, and you now see me applying the top coat. Incidentally, we're using the Meiji F55, and the reason for that is it's actually a very small compact gun, and it's one of the reasons people often ask me, can you use a full-size gun for everything? The answer is most of the time you can, but one of the problems you get is if space is limited, you know, access to things is limited. Now, when we come to actually spraying the rods on this, and you probably wonder what it actually will look like at the moment, I'm fasting forward to see whether this video is worth watching. It may be, it may not, but for someone like me, it's quite an appealing project to do, and I quite enjoy doing it. But I do appreciate, as I said at the start, it is something different. But with the F55, and what a lot of people ask me is, do you really need a smaller gun? Will a bigger gun do it all? And one of the problems with the bigger guns is obviously weight, although you can get lighter, bigger guns, but also access to things. But again, another thing you often get, if you're using a full-size gun and you've got the fan turned right in and the fluid down, that's absolutely fine. It will work reasonably okay. It will not atomise as fine as one of these, or an LPH50 or an LPH80. Incidentally, the LPH80, the LPH50, or this, I could have used any of them quite happily for this, or the Decals Micro SOI Pro Light, or Pro Light S as it's called now. So any of those guns would work perfectly well. They atomise really finely, and they give you a nice small fan. What they also do compared to a full-size gun is they use a lot less air. So if you're, one of the things that you get with a full-size gun, if you're using a full-size gun to do something, you will get the speed. So it'll obviously apply more material, and you'll be able to cover the area that you're doing much faster. Now that, on a project like this, that all goes out the window, because the only bit that it would do much faster is the bit we're seeing now, which is the side plates of this shoe rack. That is the only bit that it would do a bit faster. One of the drawbacks is obviously the air consumption, which is what I just mentioned, but also the force with which it pushes out the fluid. So because it's using more air, normally the blow effect will be more, and if you've got parts, small parts like this that are hanging, it blows them away from you. And the idea is that you want to cover it all to give yourself a good finish. But when you cover it all, it means you've got nowhere to hold or to touch or whatever, just hanging on one piece of wire. So it will inevitably swing around a bit. Even if you put it on a rigid piece of wire, which this is semi-rigid, the actual part will swing around. So that's one of the real advantages of using a what I would call a micro gun on things like this, is the fact that you use little amount of air, which will obviously help people with small air compressors, but you also get much less, it's not blowback, is it? Well, it is blowback actually in confined spaces. If you're using these guns in confined spaces, so something that is closed, it might be, say, the inside of a cylinder or something like that, anything that's curved around. So if you think of a bowl shape, if you put the gun inside, if you've got a full-size gun and it's wound down, you're going to have a lot of air coming around, and it just blows a lot of material towards the painter. Whereas with something like this, because the amount of air you're using and pushing out, it's much less, so you actually get much more applied to the surface rather than blowing back at the painter. So there is definitely an advantage to having the different size guns, and I guess that's why they make them, because as I keep saying to people, one of the things people will often message me saying, I need, what gun shall I use? Sorry, not what gun shall I use, what gun shall I buy? My budget's about 50 to 70 US dollars, something like that, or maybe pounds if they're in the UK, or, something like that. And then my next question is normally, how big's your compressor and what are you doing? Because those two parts are quite important, because it's pointless me saying to them, buy the End Tools 4000, it's a good gun, and they've only got a 1 horsepower little compressor. So it is all relevant. What you are doing is relevant to the gun you actually want, and that may sound completely obvious to some people, but to a lot of people I can assure you it isn't that obvious. Anyway, having a small gun like this is physically small as well, so as I say, it allows you to get into areas. With this, when you actually see the final stage or the final stages, what I made up was it's 2 side plates, and then I cut the actual decals, and there's a small little poem that my wife actually made up to go on the side, and I cut those out with my little Cameo 4, which is a vinyl cutter effectively. So what I will do is I'll put a link in the description so that you can see the way I use that to cut vinyl out. And we use the gold vinyl. Now the studding, which is the harder part to spray, the studding on this, which effectively is where the shoes will hang, that part needs to be done in, well, I like to do it in a direct to metal clear coat, so it actually etches to the surface, so it holds on there. You can appreciate when people's shoes are going on there with mud on them, etc., it will start to wear it away. And what we used was, I actually used a studding. It's a 10mm studding, but it's brass. Well, actually it's 10 and 8mm, but it's actually brass. And what I did was I run the wire brush across it on my bench grinder. You'll often see when I'm spraying in the background there's a bench grinder. I run it across there on the bench grinder just to give it a good shine. Now that will oxidize pretty quickly, so you need to do that just before you spray, and that also means that the surface is nice and clean, so you get maximum adhesion of the direct to metal clear coat. Now, there's a few manufacturers make direct to metal clear coat, but it's good for coating aluminium. Years ago, I put up a video. I'll try and remember to stick a link in the description, but I did a video. I often use it for motorcycle front forks. Again, you don't normally see me put the videos up because I don't think people will be that interested. I've done one, I've done a couple, and I sort of like leave it that maybe people aren't particularly interested in them. But I use again a wire wheel to give the brush effect of it's more like the original manufacturer's brush effect to the forks. And they're obviously they're aluminium bases, and the stanchions are normally chrome steel. And all the aluminium parts I use again this direct to metal clear coat, so it doesn't have any primer or anything like that. You purely put it on against the metal, and that's what I used on the studding as well. Now you see the complete rack. This is actually what it looks like, and we're just going to coat the rack. Again, you see me using a microwave. Apologies to keep repeating this, but don't use a microwave because I'm sure it's not a safe thing to do. Works perfectly well for me. It speeds the drying up of the clear coat and normally helps it flow out better. That's not particularly necessary with this, although it is something that's applicable. But you're not going to get a mirror finish on strips of brass studding. So yeah, it's just something I naturally do now, but it does help it go off quicker. And by helping it go off quicker, it means you can get on with the next coat quicker, or it cures quicker for you to finish the job. It just speeds things up really, particularly if you're in cooler conditions. Like I'm in the UK and it's normally cooler, so that's what I do. So this is full fan on the F55 in a 0.8. They also make this gun in a 0.5 as well, which I haven't got, and I don't really feel the need to get because I've got the LPH, well, I've got the LPH50, but the setup in the LPH50 and the LPH80 are actually the same. So I can use an LPH80 or an LPH50. The cap is different actually, but the tips and the needle are exactly the same. So I've got a 0.4 if I want one, or a 0.6. So I didn't feel the need to actually get anything different with the F55. But certainly things like the F55 and the LPH 50 and 80 and more of those micro guns are much more suited to things like this and various projects where the spraying needs to be more precise, just so that you don't waste loads of material and you don't get loads of overspray. If you look at the amount of overspray here, there's virtually nothing, because you're using low pressure on the gun and you're also putting out minimal material because it's only a small tip. It is my normal, it's supposed to be a high solid DTM, direct to metal clear coat, and that flows perfectly well for a 0.8 tip. A lot of people ask me about a 0.5 tip or a 0.8 tip, and do they need to thin the material down, a lot to get through the smaller tip? And the answer is normally no. I mean, I use an airbrush. I use a 0.3 and a 0.35 airbrush for spraying clear coat sometimes, and that works perfectly well. It doesn't clog the gun or anything. I normally put about 10% thinners or reducer in it just to make it slightly thinner, but it's still classed as a high solids clear coat, and it doesn't seem to make any difference. In fact, if you over thin clear coat, you can get dieback, but you can also get shrinkage where you get small cracks in the clear coat, and that's not to be confused with a reaction where you get like a gravelly effect. Years ago we used to call it crazy paving, but you get that sort of effect. The two effects are different. Normally it's much a paint reaction. The small grains will be much closer together, whereas when you get shrinkage, the cracks will appear, or the separation will appear, and it will be much more, it's a much bigger area that you will get the cracks in, so it doesn't look quite so dense, the amount of crazy paving, for want of another word, doesn't look so dense. So there is a difference between a reaction and shrinkage. And if you put too much thinners in or reducer in a clear coat, you can get shrinkage, and it might come a week later or 2 weeks later once it's cured properly, because even after 2 or 3 days a clear coat still hasn't cured properly. In fact, somebody was telling me from a paint company that sometimes they reckon, it depends on ambient temperature, etc., but it can be up to 2 months to get the full hardness of a clear coat. It can be touch dry by the end of the day, air drying it, or you bake it at 60 degrees for half an hour and it will feel touch dry, but it hasn't properly cured all the way through. So to a certain extent it will still be slightly soft. Again, that's the reason why people polish paintwork quite early on because it's easier to polish it, because the clear coat is much more receptive to being polished because it's still softer. Anyway, going back to the F55 and using it for something like I did, it's a perfect gun. Now you see me putting the fan down, making the fan smaller, and you can do that with any gun obviously, but again you've still got the trade-off that you're doing a lot of spraying here, and you're going to be using, if you're using a full-size gun, you're going to be using a lot of air, and you just don't need it in this situation. So these micro guns or mini guns, whatever you want to call them, definitely have their place, and there definitely is a need for them, in my opinion. Now, if you're just doing automotive stuff, mainly car stuff, then maybe you think maybe not. You know, if you're doing small blow-ins, etc., then maybe you think not. Maybe you wouldn't need one, and I'd probably agree with you a lot of the time. But I don't do that. I do lots of different things. So, you know, I mean, I'm probably looking for an excuse here to say that's why I've got so many different guns. But the reason I've got so many different guns is because I'm obviously stupid. There can be no other reason for it. But yeah, I mean, I like to have the right tool for the right job, if that makes sense. So with this, as I say, this is a direct to metal clear coat. So I literally did the rods about an hour and a half before I started applying the clear coat. And the reason for that is what I said before, is oxidization. These things will start to go, they don't, oxidization of brass, it just makes it look duller. It loses its gold look, if that makes sense. It ends up, I mean, look at any brass fitting on your water system or something like that, you will notice that it goes quite a dull gold colour. Well, I mean, brass has its own colour, doesn't it? But when you polish it up like this, or buff it up like this, it looks really shiny. So by putting the clear coat on it, it actually keeps it shiny all the time. Now, this is probably going to be used inside. I say probably because it's perfectly capable of being left outside, and it shouldn't tarnish, and you shouldn't have any problems with it, because the lacquer will be protecting all of it, including the decals, etc. One of the things I should mention, that I keep forgetting, is the Meiji brand, and those that watch my videos on the Meiji will know that I get these from a company called paintingtool.jp. But in the UK we actually have an importer now, which is BSS, Beyond Surface Solutions, and they are an official importer for Meiji. Actually, Meiji have just released the F111. I've got the F110 and the 110L, but they've just released the F111, which is an updated version. I think they started on the F60, I think it was, or F70. So they've evolved. I mean, they've been going 100 years, so they've actually evolved quite a bit from, you know, where the original F series started. But that looks a really good gun. So unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I will have to get one of those, because it does look good. I don't know whether they make an L version of it yet, which is the low pressure one. And by low pressure, I mean low pressure, not necessarily low air consumption. Again, another thing that people get mixed up with low pressure and air consumption. Just because a gun works at low pressure doesn't mean it's low air consumption. In fact, it's often the opposite. The lower pressure gun will consume as much as a higher pressure gun, if not more. Simply because to propel the material and get the material out of the gun, because it's effectively sucked out of the gun. It isn't pushed, it's sucked out of the gun. To get it out of the gun, you need a certain volume of air. Now, if you haven't got the pressure, you normally need more of a volume of air to get it out and atomize it. So, as I say, people often get confused with those two, but air consumption and air pressure are two totally different things when you're looking at guns. Yeah, and it's worth thinking about, because it does actually make a difference, because some people buy guns thinking that they're low air consumption. They can't use them because their compressor just cannot keep up with the gun. Another thing I need to touch on while we've got a long video, and apologies to those people that don't like me rabbiting and nattering on too much. I did have one guy say to me that the video was good, but there was too much talking. Now other people actually really enjoy the talking, so yeah, I mean, you'll never please anybody, so yeah, I just carry on as I am. But anyway, what I was going to say is, someone said to me about my trigger action is wrong, and a couple of people have said that to me throughout the last few years, that my trigger action is wrong. And what they mean by that is that I will pull a trigger in all the way to release the material, and then when I shut off, I will let the trigger go completely. Now, good practice would normally be, and I agree with what they're saying, good practice would normally be that you pull the trigger in to release the material, and then when you back it off enough to keep the air running but the material stops. So you know that point where you pull the lever in and you first get the surge of air but no material, because you're actually opening the air valve to allow the air through, but you're not pulling the trigger in enough to actually move the needle back to let material through. So the ideal position would be to, you're pulling it back, you're spraying away, so the material's coming out, and then when you come to do your next pass, you let the lever off so that it's still blowing air through, but the material isn't coming through, so you're not pushing the needle back at all. And then when you come to do your next pass, you just pull the trigger in that little extra bit, the material comes through, and away you go. Now, I appreciate that is best practice. It's something that I don't normally do. The only time I actually do it, incidentally, is with airbrushes, because what this chap was saying is that you can get spitting, and you can get spitting sometimes, although on mini guns like this, which is micro gun, mini guns, midi guns and full-size guns, I'd never have a problem with spitting, with doing it the way I do, only with airbrushes. So I see no reason to change it. And another thing in my defence is that I actually use a lot of different spray guns, so it's very difficult to get used to that spray gun, to get to know the amount you ease off the trigger so that you are not pumping out material and you're just letting air through. And then obviously for your next pass, you as I said before, you just pull in. So it's quite difficult to actually get that that balance, because I'm just not used to the guns enough, because I swap and change guns all the time. If I use one gun for something in the morning, you can guarantee I'll swap it over for another one, because I've always got something I want to try out, something I want to test, something I think, I wouldn't mind using that again, because I've just got too many of them really to actually get that finely honed with it. But I can see what a couple of people have said, and I would agree with them. But one of the things I think it saves me is what I was saying about regulators, and those that watch the channel will know that I've got a video out, which I'll put a link in the description, but I use diaphragm regulators. There's one in my system, and there's one on the gun now, although having said that, I used to use non-diaphragm regulators and I still never used to get any spitting. I think it's just that modern guns are that well made that you just don't get a problem anymore, whereas you used to get a paint build up sometimes, like you still do in airbrushes, and I've got some good quality airbrushes, so it's not the quality of the airbrushes. If the material's too thick, it can cause it sometimes, but obviously we're talking about really small tips of airbrushes. But yeah, I just don't get a problem. But what I was saying to him, one of the things I was saying is, because I use a regulator, and I use a regulator at the gun with a diaphragm in it, so I've got two diaphragms in my air line. The actual pressure, so something like this that I'm using on one bar, which is about 14.5 psi, the pressure coming to the gun would be about 18 psi, 19 psi. So when you pull that trigger in from letting go, there's not a huge initial surge of air. If you've got your compressor set to maximum output, which on guns that use a lot of air you may well have to, just to get the flow through the pipes, even if you've got quite large diameter pipes, you still need that compressor on maximum, because there'll be a block somewhere there'll be somewhere that's smaller diameter than the rest of it, and that will be your traffic jam effectively, or air jam effectively. So because I use regulators, I don't get the problem of that initial surge of air, and that, I'm sure that initial surge of air can cause people problems with spitting. So I think it's just the way I do things, the modern equipment, and the fact that I use a diaphragm regulator just means that I don't need to do it properly, and it doesn't penalise me, because, well, you've seen my work, you've seen what I do. I don't get spitting. The guns don't spit. Only airbrushes, and normally with airbrushes, as I say, I will have the air on. I will do a few small little test patches just to see what sort of pattern and make sure the material is running smoothly, and then I will keep the air on, move to the work, and then introduce the material, which is what he's suggesting you should do with a spray gun. But as I say, I've never found a need to do it. Anyway, sorry about going off topic so much, but you know, I do like to share some of the stuff that you know, comes up on the channel. It's all through this channel or Instagram or something. But this is the final result. I was really pleased with this, and as I say, it will be a bit odd. There are a lot of people that thinks, oh, what's the point in that video? But I thought I would do it. There's a few things I've got coming up that are a bit odd, but it's just a bit of what I do, and I know some people are actually interested in what I do. But I thought it came out really, really nice, and it's very simple, but it's a very mechanical shoe stand, so it would appeal to somebody that's into engineering and things like that. As I say, yes, it is simple, but it's a very good shoe stand and works really well. You can actually put some on the bottom and some on the top, so you can get quite a lot of stuff on it. But yeah, I think it came out well. This was done, I think this was done about 7 months ago, and it's been in use regularly. It's still just as everything's kept its shine. The direct metal clear coat has etched really well, and it lasts really well. Anyway guys, thanks for watching as always, and if you're with me to the end, then a big appreciation, because this is quite long and probably a bit boring to many. But anyway, cheers guys, bye bye.